You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Hahn,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Lea Geller.
Thanks for tuning into Author Stories. We've got a fantastic show for you today. But before we get into that, I'd like to tell you about a couple of sponsors who make the show possible each and every day. Craig Allenson has a brand new book. It's a spinoff of the Expeditionary Force series, Expeditionary Force Mavericks, Book 1, Death Trap. The human soldiers stranded on the planet Paradise have been recruited into an alien legion to do the dirty jobs that the high-tech species won't do. Their first mission is to kick the enemy off a backwater planet no one cares about. It's a simple assignment, except everyone has a hidden agenda, and the planet could become a death trap. Craig Allenson's brand new book, Death Trap. Also thanks to Ernie Lindsay with his Sarah series, the psychological thriller series that begins with Sarah, has books 1 through 3 and a bonus novella, Single Mother, Successful Executive, Target for Revenge. The psychological thriller series box set Sarah Winthrop's world is thrown headlong into a whirlwind of chaos, along with her family, friends, and colleagues, by unseen enemies seeking revenge. Those lurking in the shadows, clawing for vengeance, will go to any lengths. Any lengths. It's likely never occurred to them that they may have just messed with the wrong woman. The Sarah series, books 1 through 3 and a bonus novella by Ernie Lindsay. Also, John L. Monk with the Jenkins Cycle. From Book 1, Kick, a supernatural thriller. They say suicides are damned for eternity, but if possessing the bodies of violent criminals is hell, then Dan Jenkins will take it, and he does, every time a portal arrives to whisk him from his ghostly exile. Normally, before the villain returns to kick him out, Dan dishes out a final serving of justice and leaves the world a safer place. It's one of the rules if he wants more rides, and he's happy to oblige. For a part-time dead guy, it's a pretty good gig. And then he meets her. Kick is the first book in a series of supernatural thrillers. If you like Quantum Leap and Everyday, you'll love this gritty and original take on the body-hopping hero story. Vividly written, Kick is a wild ride with a sharp, sarcastic wit and a flawed, yet likable main character. From John L. Monk, The Jenkins Cycle, Book 1, Kick. And from M.D. Massey, Invasion, Zombie Apocalypse. The action-packed first novel in M.D. Massey's Them Zombie Apocalypse series. When a surprise nuclear attack forces Aiden from hiding, he finds the world to be a much different place and more deadly. Now he'll traverse a post-apocalyptic landscape populated by violent redneck looters, rogue military factions, and an army of hungry undead. After 2 combat tours in the Middle East, Aiden Sullivan just wants to be left alone on his family's ranch in the Texas Hill Country. But when the bombs fall and the dead walk, Aiden risks life and limb to rescue his aging parents from the zombie horde. To save them, he'll traverse half the state of Texas while fighting rogue military units, violent redneck looters, and thousands of walking dead. The question is, can he make it there in time? Only one thing's for sure, this ranger will complete the mission or he'll die trying. M.D. Massey's Invasion, Zombie Apocalypse. Now on to our show. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Lea Geller on the show with me today. She has a fantastic new book called Trophy Life, and when you're hearing this, it is out everywhere now in paperback and audiobook and Kindle edition, however you like to read books. Trophy Life is available everywhere. Welcome to the show, Lea.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you. Lea, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Very young. I think most writers probably feel this way. I think it was probably the first thing I ever wanted to be, and I ended up doing lots of things first before I did it. But I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and writing stories in school and coming home and writing them in my journal. I was an avid journal keeper I still am, for many years. And I think that back then, even if you asked me what I wanted to do, I would have said a writer.
Wow. Were you were a big reader?
I grew up in England where I live in the States now, and my kids are in American schools, but we all learned to read and write at a much younger age. It was a completely different educational system, and for better or for worse. And yes, I was a very, very big reader, probably starting at like 5 or 6. And I have a very strong memory of my mother. We moved to the States when I was 8, and I remember my mother came to America to do a pilot trip to see the schools and everything for us, and she came home with Judy Blume books. And no one had heard of Judy Blume in England, and I just disappeared. And I thought, this is great. I'm moving to America, and my life is basically going to be the Brady Bunch meets Judy Blume. Like, that was what I thought I was coming to.
Well, I'm a huge Judy Blume fan. She was one of my early influences as well, and Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing changed my life.
Mine too.
Yeah, and I can. I like to ask people about their early influences because those things tend to pop up in our own, writing and stuff later in life, and I can definitely see that thread of Judy Blume that has traveled with you through the years.
I hope so. I remember being here, and one of my first years in the States, I wrote her fan mail. I even had to do like a school project, and I think I made a board game about Judy Blume books, and I think it was just the humanity in them. She really saw kids. And she saw kids as flawed, but I think she really saw the humanity in kids, even when they weren't that likable to other people.
Right.
Which I think, hopefully I really try, and that's my goal as well, is to try to find that piece of humanity in them as well when writing about them.
I love that.
And she's funny.
She is.
That's huge.
And she finds a way to make us laugh at ourselves.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes, she really does, and not take ourselves too seriously.
Exactly, which is what you do in Trophy Life. Kind of turning that mirror and back toward us and allowing to see the kind of absurdity of life.
And the absurdity of parenting also,
right.
Which I think is how I really started to write. I started by blogging about parenting, and it really is such an absurd undertaking, right. And especially to keep doing it over and over again, having kids. It's just, you just have to be like an optimist with no institutional memory, and it's really right, and it's absurd. And the same thing for writing about kids and parenting and all of that.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back to that in just a minute, but
Sure.
you mentioned coming to the States at 8 years old, and you have this fantastic accent that's this beautiful blend of this side of the pond and that. How do you feel like that move and the your early development years being in England and then later years here in the States? I love to see how a sense of place affects people and how where we're from pops up into things that we do and the art that we make. How do you feel like being British and American has affected the way you see the world, maybe, or the stories that you tell?
Well, certainly as a reader, first of all, I have, if you ask me my earliest memories, they were also of C.S. Lewis and the English books that I read as a very young child. So I think that as a reader, I definitely had both sides of the Atlantic pulling me in. I also think just as a person, there were definitely very many years where I never really felt that I belonged in either place, which is good, I think, if you're going to write, because that sense of just being a little bit on the outside and looking in makes you hopefully a keen observer. When you don't really ever feel too comfortable in a place, you can be one step out and looking at it and taking notes and writing and thinking about it. And I do think that I have to sort of de-British my writing sometimes when I'm writing for an American audience, which just cracks me up because I've been here forever. I've been here for like 100 years, but I still do have, and even still, there are these sort of ticks in my writing that are still very English. So there must just be, and I sound very English considering that I've been here for 100 years. So I think there must be something in me that just connects very much to it. And I just keep taking it with me. And again, as a reader and a writer, and if you ask me who I read, some of my favorite authors are English authors, even still. So I think it's just in me.
I love that. There's just something that can't be shaken about those earliest influences.
No.
They go with us.
It's so interesting.
Yeah, throughout life. You mentioned that you started a blog about parenting. Was that your first real foray into writing, or was there something before that?
It was probably my first real foray. I might have done an article here and there, but no, I think I was living in Seattle at the time and having babies and in the rain. And it was a challenge. And I had just moved there from Southern California. So that was, leaving Southern California is just in general a trial, especially in February. Which is when we moved to Seattle. And I just felt like I needed somewhere to put everything. And I started a blog. And I think it was my first I remember hitting send on that first blog entry, thinking, wow, this is the first time people are going to really read what I've written, as opposed to writing it in secret in a journal. So yeah, I think probably it was. And then from that, some things came. But yeah, I think it was probably my first foray.
Did you tell people that you knew that you were writing this blog?
I did. I think I put the first entry on Facebook. I wasn't writing into a void. I was like, here, read this. Yeah.
Right. What were some of the reactions and responses that you got to what you were writing?
They were pretty good, and it felt great. The blog was called, it still is, it was called This is the Corner We Pee In. And it was about, and so, once you have that, where are you going to go? But I have 5 kids, and my oldest 2 are boys, and it was just like, it was just so physical for me raising these boys and just finding pee in every corner, which is basically how it happened. And I just felt it wasn't how I was raised in a very English home where there were rules, and I couldn't seem to make rules. I couldn't seem to enforce rules. And I just always was telling these funny stories, and people were like, oh, you should write that one down. And these boys would just do this stuff. And I remember writing it down and writing the about section about how I came up with the blog title one day when I was looking for something. And my boys said, oh, it's in the corner we pee in. And they were like 3 and 5. And I was like, wait, what? So I was like, oh, yeah, it's in that corner behind the TV on all the wires that we pee in. I said, well, why are you peeing in that corner? And there's a bathroom next. They said, well, when we go to the bathroom, we can't see the TV.
Oh, my goodness.
So instead of getting up and walking 10 feet, they just stood behind the TV and peed on all the cable wires. Right, on things. For a year, no one smelt it, and it was just, and I put that out there, and I think people thought it was funny. But as I began to write more and just sort of reveal the underside of parenting, I got a lot of, wow, I'm so glad it's not just me. And in general, I feel like that's a big response to the things that I put out on the blog was, wow, that's how, either mine was just more in Technicolor, or it just made people feel better about their own mishaps and misfires in parenting.
Oh, that's amazing. That is amazing. My wife and I also have 5 kids, and
oh, really?
I can relate to those struggles, especially when ours are fairly close in age, and when they're just a little band of bandits, ganging up on the parents, it can be pretty trying.
It's the best feeling and the worst feeling when you see them all on one side and you on the other.
Right. The worst game of Red Rover ever.
Ever.
What year did you start the blog?
I started the blog when I was pregnant with my 4th, and she was born in 2008, so probably 2007, 2008, around then.
There was a really great period for blogging where people were following a lot of blogs, and some of that has gotten supplanted by Facebook and people are not everyone, but a lot of people abandoned their little corner of the web with their WordPress sites and things like that and moved to Facebook. But there's something special, I think, about having your own place where you can just say anything you want, tell the truth, tell it. I think blogging is still super important, and I hate seeing people moving all their stuff over to some social platform or something like that. Is the blog still something that you write on and use as your place to tell stories?
It is, and I specifically kept it, even though there's been a push to move away from blogs or to monetize them and have there be places where you can sell and get sponsored. And I very much kept mine just a place to tell stories. And I've kept it even now. And I've sort of woven a little bit of what it's like to be to write a book and publicize a book and at the same time still be a parent and still be a wife and still have all that other stuff going on. And so, yeah, I think it's in some ways it's become very important for me to sort of reveal, I know it looks really glamorous to have all this stuff going on, but I still have to make dinner, and I still have to forget that I had parent-teacher conferences and be late for doctor's appointments and all those other things.
Right. Well, I just followed your blog in my WordPress reader, so I can't wait to see what's coming up. Yeah. And I'll put a link to it in the show notes so everyone can go check it out as well. So Lee, tell us about the book, Trophy Life. The title itself obviously is a play on the idea of the trophy wife and this sort of thing. Where did first off, when a story like this comes to you, sometimes we get ideas and they're about a character. Sometimes it's maybe a premise or a plot point. How did this kind of reveal itself to you?
It revealed itself to me in two parts. The middle school piece revealed itself to me because my boys were in middle school at the time, and the house was full of their friends, and I was dealing with them and their school and all the stuff that was going on. And I just remembered listening to these boys talk about themselves when they didn't think that anybody could hear. And they were just convinced that no one liked them. Their teachers didn't like them. Their parents didn't like them. They didn't like themselves. And they were just such an interesting age. And I really, as hard as it was, there's something so interesting about this time in a child's life, in a boy's life. And I just had this image of this group of bandits, this group of boys who were just unloved and unappreciated and by themselves as well. And I felt like someone has to write. No one's writing about this. People are writing for middle schoolers, but wouldn't it be interesting to write for adults about parenting middle schoolers or about teaching middle schoolers? They're so funny. They're so ripe for stories. And so that piece came to me. And the protagonist piece came to me because I just have a very strong memory of when I had my first child. We were living in California. And I would go to these baby groups, and there would be some women in these baby groups who were either my age or a little bit younger, and they were married to much older men. And they all looked fabulous very quickly after having their babies, and I did not. And my friends did not. And, some of us went back to work, some of us didn't, but our lives were very different than these women's lives. And they lived in these big houses with drapes. I mean, our kids were sleeping with us in the room or sometimes in a drawer in the room. We were all really starting out. And I always thought to myself, what happens to these women? Like, what does it look like 10 years from now? And I was so fascinated by them. And so it was sort of, it's interesting because no one really likes a middle schooler and nobody really likes a trophy wife. And so what happens when they're in a room together? And that sort of came to me. And it's also a little bit about what happens when one of your friends marries somebody you don't like, which happens to women everywhere. I think that every woman has that one friend who is with someone she just doesn't like. And how do you be a friend to that? So that's the friend piece as well. So I think that all sort of came together in sort of one story.
So tell me about Agnes. How did Agnes come to you?
Agnes came to me because I would meet some women who were very much like her in the sense that they didn't come from very much. They didn't think about themselves as coming from very much. And they were married to men who were very successful, very smart. And it was always, to me, seemed a little bit of a strange union. And I was always fascinated by the women that choose these men and the men that choose these women. And I had encountered some women like her. In real life, it's also sort of in my imagination. I would imagine I would meet someone and sort of imagine her whole story in my mind, which is what I do a lot. And she came to me that way as this Californian who had never left the state, who had very humble upbringings, who had worked very, very hard. And I had met women like her and didn't know that much about them. And so I just sort of imagined what her life must have been like before and then after she met her husband. And so my kids went to this hippie preschool in Santa Monica, which is like the one she taught at. And so I just sort of felt like I knew her even peripherally. I knew this type of person. And that's where she was born. And I loved the name Agnes, and my husband wouldn't let me use it on any of the kids. Wouldn't let me. I basically chose every name. But this one, he was like, sorry, no. So I got to use it somewhere.
I love it. this is a work of fiction that is obviously born out of observations that you've made, and we all find ourselves in a situation that we start imagining the what ifs of that situation. After writing a blog for so long and having a following and really finding your voice and something that people expect from you, when you transition to writing fiction, what are the big challenges to not putting too much of reality in it, because that's what the blog is for, but also using the voice that people are used to tell this fictional story?
I was fortunate to have the voice. That's right. Like, I had already developed something of a voice, and I think that people who've read the blog will hear it. Even if they don't hear it immediately, they'll find it here and there throughout the story. And so I think that was an advantage of having honed a voice over time with the blog. I think the challenges are that every writer has, especially with her first novel, which is, I think the final draft did not have anywhere near as much of my life in it as the first draft did, because you just have this instinct to just dump so much about your own life into the first draft, partly because you should write what you know, and partly because emotionally it's gratifying to things that tick you off about people that you know or situations that you've been in. You want to put it all in there. And, with each draft, there were just times where I felt like, okay, it felt really good to write this and sort of exercise this experience, but it doesn't really need to be in here, and no one needs to see it. So I think it's making sure that it's autobiographical in the sense that if everything is copy, and as Nora Ephron said, so your life is going to be in it, but just not too much. Like, there are things that you might have needed to write for the process, but they don't need to stay in the book.
Right. And a lot of times, it's funny to ask readers, what they think are pieces of reality that have found their way into fiction and what pieces are not. Because we all find ourselves in our characters and situations, and, we borrow from real life. But a lot of times the things that we think are like us, don't really bear out in the fiction. Like the things that are most about me, I might write into the character of a woman or something like that, but to me those are definitely pieces of me in my life, and they get woven into the fiction in strange ways sometimes.
Right, and they don't necessarily find their way into the protagonist. Exactly. And so, right, and in some ways that's the most effective use of your own life, because you can write about it a little bit more removed.
Right. So the character of Agnes, she's, we've talked about her upward trajectory and how, her before she met her husband and when, but then her life takes a turn. Where did this part of the story come from?
I think I just always have found stories fascinating when they're about someone who has to pick herself up and go to the next place on her own. I think that's why. I think that I just have that inherent piece in me in telling stories, even if things that I'm writing now. I'm still very interested in stories, not just women's stories, in the stories about people whose lives take a turn that they didn't expect. And how do you get to that next point? Because it's just so universal, and it's just so interesting to me to see how you do it. And in her case, how you do it without anyone's help, and certainly without the help of any men, which is something that she's not had for a while. She's had so much help from him and so much guidance, maybe too much, that I was just fascinated in what happens to these women when all that disappears, and then how do they do that next thing?
Yeah. You have a penchant for placing things oddly, and it manifests in the book as appliances, and these really kind of funny twist on everyday life. Is that a metaphor for the way life is, and things rarely go as expected?
100%. Certainly in my life. I think so. I think that it's, there was a time when that might have been disappointing or stressful to me, but I think I take great comfort in the fact that now you can only really do so much planning, because things will just not go as planned.
Right. Did you know from the beginning that Trophy Life was going to be a novel? Did it begin as just a writing exercise, or was this something you set out to do from the beginning?
No, No, I knew it was going to be a novel. I got a message one day, like a Facebook Messenger message from someone who I've never met who reads my blog. And she said, if you've ever thought about writing a novel, a friend of mine is teaching a workshop at Sarah Lawrence College, which is near my house. And I thought, well, I mean, who hasn't thought about writing a novel? I was like, sure. And it happened to be at a time in my life where I had a little bit of time to do it. My youngest child had just started pre-K, and I had a chunk of time. And I had been working from home before that, but I had left. I was looking for the next thing. And I showed up at this writing workshop, and it was a novel writing workshop, and it was a romance novel. And I said to the woman running it, I know one thing is for sure, I'm probably not going to write a romance novel. She said, well, a novel is a novel. You're going to learn basic structure, basic character, basic storytelling. So take it and see what you think. And I sat in this class, and the story just kind of fell out for me. And so I knew from the beginning that it was a work of fiction.
The book is really funny without being goofy. Are there any things that you picked up along the way in your writing that help you to bring levity without just being silly?
I think, it's funny because goofy is a great word. Like you really want to be funny without going too far. I think that part of that's just me a little bit. Like I like funny humor, but I just don't like goofy humor. So part of it's just what I like to read and how I like to think. And there were definitely times where I got feedback, well, this scene is going a little bit too far, like dial it back. So I'm sure that there were times when part of that is in the workshop process, when you get some feedback like that, you can write the absurd, but then there's just always one step too far. So I'm sure I got some feedback like that from my workshops.
Do you have a daily writing habit?
I do. I do. I wake up in the morning. I yell for like an hour and a half until everybody leaves. And then I go a good hour and a half. I make like 12 breakfasts for 5 people. I yell, they leave. I go for a run, and then I write for a while. Yeah, I teach part-time now, so I, on some days, have to run out of the house for about an hour to teach, funnily enough, middle school English. But and then, I try to write early, to start early in the day, because I'm an early riser. So at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I start to move closer and closer to bedtime. I'm in pajamas by 5. I'm thinking about bed by 6, even though I might not be going to bed. When I get into my bed, I just sort of take meetings from the children because I can no longer move around the house. So it's, there are days where I wake up at 5 and write for a couple of hours before anybody wakes up. But generally, it's the early part of the day.
Yeah. You are a recovering lawyer, also. We haven't talked much about. Did your time as a lawyer? Do you feel like that added anything to what you're doing now?
It's interesting. I was a reluctant lawyer, like many people that I know, certainly around my age, and I was. There were lots of, especially women that I know, who sort of were encouraged to go to law school because it's a nice career to have, and it's a good thing to, it's always good to have a job, and writing isn't really a career. And I feel like I know lots of women, certainly in my law school class, who are no longer practicing because maybe their heart wasn't necessarily in it in the first place, and it informs my writing in the sense that I was an okay lawyer, but I think I'm a better writer. I certainly am a more happier writer than I was a lawyer. So it's not really a chore for me to write because I've wanted to do it for so long, and I'm so happy to do it. And I think that if you've ever spent any time doing anything that you liked but didn't love, that really sort of affects you in what you do. When you find something that you love, you're just grateful for it every day. And I really am, even in the bad parts of writing where I'm stuck or I have to trash a whole scene that I didn't want to, or when I think, God, this book is going nowhere, no one's ever going to want to see it. I still feel so grateful that I can have those problems because for a long time I was doing something that I liked, but I knew it wasn't really what I should be doing. So there's that. And what I did like as a lawyer was that I did criminal appeals work for people who couldn't afford counsel. So I was a kind of the lawyer that you get. I was an appointed counsel. And what I really loved about that was feeling like I was doing something good, feeling like I was really able to reach out and help people. And there's a piece of that still stays with me while I'm writing. And I certainly feel that when I was writing about these boys in trophy life, I felt like so many people are so harsh on these kids at this age that if I could just sort of, paint them with a more humane brush, then maybe other people would appreciate them a little more. And so I wouldn't say there's social justice in my writing like there was in my lawyering, but I did want to get a point across.
Sure.
Yeah.
So,
and my view.
Right. And what's amazing, and one of the things I love about Story is that we can talk about things that are difficult and hard and that are serious, and when we couch it in story, it sure comes across a lot better. And you can talk to people in that way, in ways that you can't any other way.
Right, because they're disarmed. Also,
exactly.
It's like, as we all are in fiction.
Right.
You think, you're reading a work of fiction, your defenses are not up.
Right, exactly. So Lee, what are you working on now? This book is probably a couple of years or more in the making. That it's been turned in, edited, and probably edited 2 more times, and going through the entire publishing process. It's now out for the world to see. What do you do with yourself after that?
I write another book, which is what I'm working on now. So I am in the I'm about at the halfway point of my next project, or at least the initial draft of my next project.
Nice.
Which is also a work of fiction.
Excellent. When do you think we might see that?
I'm hoping next year. That's my plan. I'm hoping to have a first draft by the end of the summer, and not my first draft, like a working draft, a much better draft by the end of the summer. And hopefully I can get it out next year. But can I tell you what it's about?
Hey, please.
It's called The County Duchess. And it's about this woman who moves from New York City to Dutchess County, which is upstate New York, or on the Hudson Valley, which is a very trendy place to live now in New York. And she's a little bit miserable about the move, and she didn't necessarily want to go. Her husband didn't get tenure in the city, and he got a job in university up in Dutchess. And she's a frustrated writer, also a recovering lawyer, and she starts to blog secretly and anonymously about her town and about the women in it mostly as an outlet. And she names herself the County Duchess as a play on her location. And the blog takes off, and it goes viral, and nobody knows who she is. And, of course, it's what happens when all that blows up in her face. So I get to write about a blogger now.
I love it.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see what comes out of that. Lee, if people are just learning about you and everything that you do, is there a place where they can find you online, connect? And we mentioned the blog. What about for your other writing?
So the blog is thisisthecornerypn.com. I am at leageller.com as well. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram in both places, so they can find me there with links to my blog and on Facebook. So I'm pretty ubiquitous, I think, on those three platforms.
Excellent. Well, we're going to put links to everything in the show notes. Lea Geller, this has been so much fun talking with you. I wish you tremendous success on the book release, and we'll be sending everybody to see you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you as well.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Hello, young one. What ghoulish tale of horror shall we explore tonight? Shall we watch The Creepshow? The Nightmare on Elm Street? Child of the night, give me your answer.
Which one would Mom kill us for watching? Said Buddy. Dad grinned and his eyes grew wide.
Which do you think, Child of the Jackal?
The Omen!
And we might have time for Omen too, if we hurry. She'll be home by 11.
I'll be back. Buddy ran to his room. He stripped down to his Yoda underwear and fished in the closet. 2 minutes later, he snuck back into the living room wearing his skeleton costume from last Halloween. He crept up behind his dad, who was cueing the movie. But David Rittermeyer was too clever for that. He spun around at the last moment and bared fang teeth torn from paper plates, drawing a yip of surprise and a cry of, "No fair!" Daddy kicked off his Reeboks, plopped his smelly gym socks on the coffee table, another thing that Mom would hate, and killed the lights. The scary intro music began. The screen showed the silhouette of a boy, about Buddy's age. His shadow was a long, creepy cross. The Antichrist, the son of the devil. Born of a jackal on a night of astrological portent, destined to bring about the end times and the final battle of good versus evil. Buddy sipped Sunkist and scooted up next to his dad. As the movie got scarier, he slipped an arm through his father's and cupped his big bicep. Buddy could feel his father's pulse. Dads get scared too. They flinched together, shouted together, pointed at the screen and covered their faces together. Buddy pressed his eyes to Daddy's shoulder just before the on-screen maid shouted, "It's all for you, Damien!" and dove from the roof, hanging herself. Buddy knew which parts he was old enough to watch and which parts he wasn't. He trusted his dad to let him know when to look again. Occasionally, his dad tricked him into peeking too soon, but that was part of the fun. They kicked their feet at the screen and shouted, "Look up! Look up! Oh, idiot! Don't get yourself killed!" At the climax, the hero of the movie, Mr. Thorne, discovered a birthmark of 3 6s on his son's head and dragged the little Antichrist to the altar of the church, determined to spear his son with holy daggers and end evil forever. After it was over, the Rittermeyer men sat silently through the credits. David put an arm around his son and ran his fingers through Buddy's hair. He wasn't searching for devil marks. He knew there weren't any. And Buddy was certain there were no daggers in his father's hand, either. Those things were just make-believe. Real fathers and sons don't do bad things to each other. They were queuing up Omen 2 when the power went out. "No," Buddy whined. "Not on movie night." Daddy went to the window. "It's the whole block. Sorry, Damien. How about, scary blackout. Go get the Ouija board out of the guest room closet. Cool. And candles." Buddy found the Ouija board, hidden under old clothes. When he shut the sliding door again, the sight of a monster startled him, and he let out an involuntary, "huh" sound. It was his own skeleton-bodied reflection in the mirrored closet door. He stared at it. He liked the effect of moonlight on his cheeks. Spectral, haunted, his eyes big and white. He clacked his teeth at himself, picturing his own grinning skull under his child's flesh, and gave an evil laugh. He was answered by a scream. A woman's scream. High-pitched and far away. One of the neighbors? Buddy dropped the Ouija board into a patch of moonlight and sat with it. "What's going on?" he whispered, his fingers on the heart-shaped wood planchette.